Well, hello and welcome to a Photographic Live and of course Seesaw, in which myself and Fiona Hayes, art director, curator, lecturer and many things in addition to that, tells us about the exhibitions she's been to see over the past month. Let's hear what she's got to say, shall we?
Hi, Grant. It's great to be back. Thank you very much. All fine. Enjoying the hot summer. And you?
Yeah, I'm always busy, as you know. But one of the things I was going to, I suppose, check in with you about is have you been hiding from the rain and the sun in the cool spaces of the gallery?
I have. Some of them are not that cool, the spaces of the galleries, but yeah, definitely. I have. In fact, I've got 4 exhibitions that I thought I'd like to put on your radar this time. A couple of things that I've been reading and a date for your diary. How does that sound?
That sounds fantastic. I wish I had a diary, but let's kick off. Well, where are we going to begin?
Okay, so basically, the 4 exhibitions I want to talk about, and I won't talk at huge length about all 4 of them, but the one thing they have in common is that they are all in venues you might not think of when you think of photography exhibitions. And partly, it's just thinking it's summertime, you're doing stuff with the family, kids' holidays and stuff like that. So what are kind of places that you might see photography exhibitions without actually thinking, right, I'm just specifically going to a photography exhibition. And the first place is the Imperial War Museum in London. Have you been to the Imperial War Museum?
I've been going there since I was a wee small child, I'll have to tell you, since I was probably about 5 or 6 years of age.
Oh my goodness. Well, I have to admit, I only went there for the first time. It's really it's much more exciting and thought-provoking than I thought it was going to be for everyone. So they have their giant bombs and they have their Spitfires and what have you, but they also have exhibitions, art exhibitions. And the one that's on at the moment is Tim Hetherington, Storyteller. So Tim Hetherington, as I'm sure you know, and I'm sure some of our listeners, your listeners at least will know, Timothy Alistair Telemachus Hetherington. He's British. He was born in 1970. He was brought up in Southport. He read classics at Oxford. After he graduated, he traveled for a couple of years in China, India, Tibet, and he decided he wanted to make images. So he came back to the UK and he studied photography at night school, and he went back to college, studied photojournalism at Cardiff, and then he started his career at The Big Issue. So right from the beginning, he had a social conscience, and he spent several years in West Africa, documenting political upheaval, documenting the effects on daily life of political upheaval and civil war and strife in Liberia, Sierra Leone, Nigeria. He made films. He worked for the United Nations. He went to Afghanistan to join the writer-journalist Sebastian Junger. They did stories for Vanity Fair there, and they were embedded with a U.S. Army platoon. And Tim Hetherington was killed in Misrata in Libya, covering the civil war in Libya. When he was just 40 years old. He had a short but very intense career. And in fact,
it's funny, Fee, you talking about Tim. Sorry to interrupt you there, but you said I might know him. Actually, I knew him pretty well because Tim was a great friend of a good friend of mine, John Levy, who founded Photo 8 magazine. And when John and I were working on Photo 8 magazine back in the late 90s when we launched it, Tim would often come in with his camera bags and crash on our couch as a kind of West End, central London place to stay. We were in Great Portland Street at the time. And I'll never forget the day Tim died, because John rang me and gave me the news. And I have to say, it hit us both really hard. And then I of course, went to the memorial service. So it's strange hearing you speak about him in the abstract when I sort of think of him very much as a friend.
I didn't know that, but I did I sort of knew that you must know him in some way at least, because I know that you interviewed Chris Anderson on your blog some years ago. I happened to be checking, and Chris Anderson was mentioning being part of this generation of experimenting with the transience of the still and the moving image, and how he was doing that, and Tim Hetherington was doing that as well.
Yeah,
Um,
he was really at the forefront of that, making some very experimental kind of video based films when he was in Africa.
and those are making up part of the exhibition.
They're
Film.
very hard to find or see, so that's wonderful to hear.
It's a great exhibition. I mean, it's basically he had so many awards, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, Tim is one of those photographers whose kind of star burned bright for a relatively short amount of time, but he sure made an impression. And I think it's amazing to think that his work's being seen, all these years later in an environment that I think he would have found. I don't know. Maybe he'd have found it difficult to be in the Imperial War Museum. I'm not sure.
Well, according to the exhibition, when he was before he was killed, he was applying to Magnum. Did you know about this?
Yeah.
So he was applying to Magnum, but then he was killed, and his estate is now represented by the Imperial War Museum.
Okay.
So he has, I mean, there's such a long list of something like 13 awards he had, including World Press Photo, the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance, Oscar nomination for the documentary Restrepo that he and Younger made in Afghanistan. So, all of these are obviously very good reasons for anyone to go and see the exhibition at the Imperial War Museum. And all of these are touched on in the exhibition. Also, despite all of this, there haven't been very many exhibitions of his work. There have been a few group exhibitions, but there hasn't been a lot of exposure of his work. So it's really something very special to be able to go and see it.
I mean, the work that's most often seen, I suppose, is the sleeping soldiers in Afghanistan. I presume they're included as well.
They definitely are. And Sleeping Soldiers, both the video and stills from that are on there. So I'm looking at some of the images now. They're very, very emotional, very, these are soldiers. They're in Afghanistan. They're under fire from at all times. They're in a very, very dangerous place. And they're sleeping like, little boys. It's very touching, very raw, I guess. And the imagery, the pictures that he made, the films that he made have this kind of, you can see why Vanity Fair would go for it as well, because they have a very classic feel to them. There's an image of a soldier playing golf on the roof in Karangal Valley in Afghanistan, and it's straight out of MASH, Robert Altman's film MASH.
Yeah. Have you seen Restrepo?
I have not, and that's not actually in it, but there's lots of other things.
I do recommend that, and also the book as well, Restrepo.
Absolutely. I definitely think that'd be worth following up on this. I would love to. Other things that are in this exhibition, that his work from Libya, his work from Liberia. For instance, they say that the Second Liberian Civil War was his first experience of an active front line, and he followed the Liberians United for Reconciliation and Democracy as they marched on Monrovia to force President Charles Taylor from power. And I guess, how would you describe him? Would you describe him as a war photographer or conflict?
I think they're very difficult words to put together, aren't they? I mean, I always use the word conflict.
Yeah.
I suppose in a sense they're conflict documentarians. Because I think he was more than just somebody who took photographs in a war zone.
And he also, the exhibition, it's not a huge exhibition, but has a lot of different things. And the graphic design of the exhibition was inspired by his experimental mental approach to displaying his own work. So there was a fly poster exhibition of work that he put out of his photography. He put together in Lagos, Nigeria. And so there are images of the exhibition on the streets of Lagos. And that was part of the inspiration for the exhibition at the Imperial War Museum. There's some amazing things that he said as well. I mean, just some of his quotes about, I'm just looking for a good one here. I don't set out to make a work of journalism, but rather a visual novel that draws upon real people and places.
Yeah, that really very much fits with, my memories of Tim. I mean, he was a very intense character, very serious. And I'm very serious about what he did. And I think there is a certain romanticism in the work, although I'm sure not in any way intentional, but there's a soul to what he does. I think that's the right word to use.
I think that actually, that makes perfect sense. It's called Storyteller. The exhibition is called Storyteller, and it definitely, that's a great name for it. He has one of the things in the exhibition are his diaries, his final journal, which has been digitized, and so you can swipe through it and you can read comments that he wrote. There's things like, my mum used to tell me when I was growing up, it was okay to tell white lies sometimes. I woke up tonight with my head swimming with images and ideas from today about the tension between truth and beauty. You wouldn't call that war photography language, would you?
No. I think that kind of illustrates that kind of sense of romanticism that I was kind of referring to there. So that's Tim at the Imperial War Museum in London.
Mm-hmm. And that is on till the end of September. So
and I can tell you that's Lambeth North Tube or a short 15-minute walk from Waterloo.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great one that's on there. Also in South London, the Horniman Museum. Now, do you know the Horniman Museum?
I do. Well, I am a South London boy, born and bred. So, although I would never go southeast London, and the Horniman is southeast, I'm more southwest. We are quite regional down there. But yeah, another great museum, the Horniman.
Well, again, and another museum that, despite everything, I had not been there. After all these years of living, I'm just a West London girl.
That's it. But I don't think people understand that if you're a Londoner, you are quite tribal to your area.
Yes. And also, if you don't have a car, you're completely right about getting the tube, but you sort of think, oh my goodness, can I actually get the tube all the way down to South London and so on? However, it really pays off, because the exhibition in the Horniman Museum is Naomi Hobson. Have you heard of Naomi Hobson?
No, that name's completely new to me.
Okay, so Naomi Hobson, the exhibition is called Adolescent Wonderland, as in Alice in Wonderland. Now, Naomi Hobson, she's an Aboriginal Australian. She's 45. She's from Queensland in Australia. She's a multidisciplinary artist. She's had several exhibitions and won awards, and her work is in various collections in Australia, but not internationally. So this is the first time. I think she's had one exhibition in Singapore, but this is the first time her work has been seen in the UK. So it's a good opportunity to discover a photographer with a new photographic vision. So it's what this exhibition is. It's quite a small exhibition, but it's images of young people, kids mostly, from the community in Cape York Peninsula in Queensland, where she lives. And she still lives and works in this small town. Her family have lived there for many, many years, for generations. And her family have been involved in political reform, social reform. She has a gorgeous website, by the way, a really lovely website that shows the work beautifully. And there's an essay on the website. One of the lines in the essay reads, "It was a brutal frontier, the place where her family are from. White settlers and their vigilantes killed an unknown number, but tens of thousands of Bama, the Aboriginal people of Cape York, in the 19th century." So she's from an area that was very oppressed in many ways, but her images are very vibrant. They're full of life. She's made a point about taking pictures of young people and allowing them to speak for themselves. So the captions to each image are quotes from the kids. All the people are in color and the backgrounds are black and white. So you really focus on the people. And the black and white background, she says, is also a nod to history, historical imagery being black and white. It's people having relaxing. It's kids relaxing by the river, lying around in garden and stuff like that. They're on bicycles and so on. And she's very, very clear that what she wants to do is give a positive impression about what these young people's lives are like. To not give any negativity, any sense of oppression, any sense of sadness, anything like that. A lot of the people in the pictures in this exhibition are wearing masks, toy masks, game masks, so you don't see their faces, and that has a sort of leveling effect. You know what I mean?
I do. Whenever I hear that kind of picture being described and the use of the word masks, I always, I should say, think of the work of Ralph Eugene Meatyard. Are you aware of his work?
I know the name, but I'm not visualizing it.
Well, I recommend you have a look at that work and his life as well, and listeners as well. If you're not aware of Ralph Eugene Meatyard, a great name and really great work. But it sounds to me like a very kind of feel-good show of work. But do you feel there was much depth to it, Fiona?
I think there's enough depth to it. I think because it touches many. There are many touch points which I think are important. For instance, the fact that we don't see photography by Aboriginal artists in this country. So that is, really worth keeping an open mind about and going to see and exploring Naomi Hobson and her other work. I think that to her, it's obviously very important, very meaningful, and to her community, it's very important and meaningful. So I think it has a great deal of importance and meaning. I feel it has depth to it. I certainly feel it's worth, well, as I said at the beginning, these exhibitions aren't in Tate Modern. They're not in the Photographers Gallery. These are exhibitions that if you're going to be in South London, for instance, it's well worth having a look.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of great stuff in the Horniman Museum as well. So, you can take it in alongside the other work. But it sounds to me as if her website is a good starting point.
Her website's a terrific starting point, and as I say, it has extra information on it. It's got interesting essays and so on. And the work that's on display in the Horniman Museum is in a particular style. She has more coloured photography on her website as well. I just think it's interesting, as you say. It is feel good, but it's not light. It's feel good because it's positive, and it's always worth seeing somebody whose work you don't see and who's comes from a place where we don't see the work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I completely know what you mean, and it's also always nice to hear new names. I think it's also interesting. You've spoken about two exhibitions you've seen this week and over the last few weeks, and both of them, you've referred to the importance of the written word as part of the overall presentation.
Yes. I think that part of, there's definitely that. And going back to that comment that I made about Tim Hetherington from your interview with Chris Anderson in 2012, part of the generation of experimenting with the transience of the still and the moving image and thinking about communication in more than one channel. In fact, I was thinking about these two and the next exhibition last night. I was thinking it's interesting that Tim Hetherington was killed, but the three artists, all born in the 1970s.
Yeah, but I think there's a couple of interesting things to that. I think one is that anybody who grew up in the late 60s, 1970s, grew up in a time where television and film were both really important in your lives culturally.
Mm.
And also, of course, the arrival of the music video in the early 80s and MTV and so forth and video cameras did give us access to that idea of making film, although it was incredibly expensive and difficult.
Exactly.
I can remember a good friend of mine who's still a filmmaker. I can remember being on foundation with him, and he had a video camera and he made videos. And that sounded like the most exotic thing to me in the world. That was kind of Hollywood.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting though about by the 90s, it was becoming cheaper, easier, and there had been there'd been a decade of MTV and being immersed in video, and so it was becoming a bit more accessible.
Yeah. But do you know what though? It's so interesting. And I was kind of evangelical around 2009, 10, 11 and so forth about the idea of photographers working with moving image and even set up Hungry Eye magazine to document it, which actually, if I remember rightly, the Christopher Anderson interview, I think, was originally in Hungry Eye. And but so many photographers were still really adamant that that wasn't their world and still are today.
Exactly. And that's a whole other discussion, really.
Yeah, it is. So what was the next exhibition?
So the next exhibition, another venue. Okay, now, have you been to the Foundling Museum?
Yes, I know that as well, I'm afraid.
All right, okay. So the Foundling Museum, and it's in central London. The exhibition is Polly Braden is the photographer. Leaving Ukraine is the exhibition. And Polly Braden is Scottish photographer. She's based in London. And she has been doing long-term projects on themes like autism, like single parenting, and she does books as well as these with her photography. And Leaving Ukraine documents the extraordinary emotional and geographical journeys of mothers, daughters, grandparents, and babies. So obviously, it's Leaving Ukraine. This is a project that she came up with in the wake of the Russian invasion in 2022. And she spent the last couple of years working with a group of young women, some of whom know each other, some of whom who do not. What provoked it was the fact that women, particularly, and girls were fleeing Ukraine, fleeing the Russian invasion with small children, with grandparents. But of course, men and boys of fighting age were not allowed to leave Ukraine. So she has, as I said, she's been working for a couple of years with this group of girls and women, just documenting their time since they left Ukraine. So there's a 21-year-old who went to live with Polly herself. There are three girls who were 15 when she first met them, who had been great friends at school and who were separated and went off to other parts of Europe. And it's all about how these women and girls, how their lives were affected by having to flee the country. It's it's quite a big exhibition. There's a lot of work in it, and it's lovely looking work, and it includes moving image as well as stills. And it's quite an interesting sort of companion piece to Naomi Hobson as well, because Naomi Hobson is so positive and the people are deeply rooted in their own community, whereas Polly Braden's subjects are completely, they're the diaspora now throughout Europe.
I wonder how is she? I mean, are we talking about? You're giving me a lot of story there. I'm presuming that there are either very long captions or that, as well as the moving image, she's contextualizing the work with the written word?
A bit of both. There are long captions and there are like fairly long explanations. So, one, for instance, when war broke out, Lena was 21. She moved from Mykolaiv to Chisinau to Mantova to London to Shipburn. When the war broke out, she was 21. She was engaged to be married, about to graduate from law school in Mykolaiv. She had to leave everything behind, including her fiance and her grandfather. Ivan, Lena, and her mother were given refuge in a room with 16 people by a local charity in Chisinau in Moldova. When Moldova came under threat, they escaped to Italy. And so you get a bit about everybody's story, backstory, and you get quotes again from the girls. So Yulia, one of them who was 15, said, "Many of us feel overwhelmed by the loss of friends and the inability to meet them. It's very isolating. If I want to cry real bad, I'll cry. It's better to let it all out than keep it inside." Again, the Naomi Hobson captions are all the kids making jokey comments. And here you have kids not making jokey comments, but making comments too.
Yeah. I wonder, I mean, I know Polly's work very well and have done for years, so I can totally see the kind of images she would have made. But it makes me wonder, one of the questions I think I probably hear the most is, what's the difference between a photo book and an exhibition of work, when you're talking about a body of work? And I guess in a sense, and Polly makes books, that in a way, apart from the moving image, would it be fair to say that this exhibition is perhaps a book on the wall?
I think that's actually, yes, it would be fair to say that. And I think, I'm not 100% sure whether it is a book yet, but I think it will be if it isn't already. That's not necessarily a bad thing. This particular, it's actually a beautiful exhibition. Some of the prints are small. They're about, kind of like 10 by 8. But then you do have, some of them are blown up to sort of like be a meter wide, this kind of thing. So it does work as an exhibition, but it will work perfectly well as a book as well.
It brings about that whole thing. Bill and I were talking on a previous episode about the idea of, what makes a narrative, a story, a body of work. And we were talking about the need for research and the need for storytelling. And a lot of photographers do seem to respond quite strongly and badly to the idea that successful photography requires an element of storytelling, however short or abstract that may be. But you've given us 3 exhibitions to go and see this month, or photographers to check up on, all of whom storytelling is absolutely intrinsic.
Absolutely. And on all parallels, because even though Tim Hetherington was working in war zones, most of the people he photographed are young people. They just were. And most of the pictures in his exhibition are young people. And even though not a lot of stuff is happening, for instance, in Polly Braden's exhibition, the girls are hanging around, they're waiting for stuff to happen, they're texting, they're on their phones, they're going to school, they're going shopping. That's a story in itself, because that's what their lives are like now.
Yeah, but it's kind of a story without an end as well, isn't it?
It is, very much so. At least let's hope it's not going to have an end, because you can imagine what the end might be.
Well, hopefully a happy ending.
Hopefully a very happy ending. Can I add one more exhibition on the same?
Of course you can. Of course you can.
This is the Courtauld Museum, the Courtauld Institute. I'm not even going to ask. Obviously, the Courtauld Institute. Did you know? I did not know that the Courtauld Institute never had a photography exhibition until this year.
That I didn't know.
No, me neither. So their first ever photography exhibition, the Courtauld in Somerset House on the Embankment in central London. Wonderful place. Roger Mayne, youth at the Courtauld Institute. And Roger Mayne, how would you describe Roger Mayne? Because I know you know Roger Mayne.
Yeah, I think I'm quite intrigued by Roger Mayne, in that he's like a band that keep getting rediscovered it's like Mayne's work keeps getting rediscovered, but it's actually a very small body of work over a very concentrated time in the late 1940s, 1950s in West London, just round where you live, actually.
Exactly.
And it's very much children on the street. So it's part of that school of work that was being created at that time by photographers like Dorothea Bohm or by Bert Hardy or any of those picture post, Grace Robertson, any of those photographers at that time. So it's interesting to me that Mayne is kind of the main man as far as this is concerned, because there was a lot of work like this being made at the same time. I think a lot of it perhaps ties in with Absolute Beginners and Colin Wilson, the novelist, and that rediscovery of Mayne when I first came across him in the 1980s.
Absolutely. And of course, Roger Mayne doing book covers for that kind of thing. It's interesting when you put it like this. It's interesting that the Courtauld Institute chose Roger Mayne for their first photography exhibition. They make a point on their website of saying it's been the last exhibition of his work was 2017, which isn't that long ago, but then, not a problem. It's great to see it. And it's a really nicely curated show. They have about 60 works in the exhibition, and they are mostly the kids on the streets, going from the post-war London 1950s, 1960s. There are girls dancing at Richmond Jazz Festival in the 1960s, teen night in Park Hill in Sheffield in 1960s, teddy girls and boys. Yes, and the Absolute Beginners novel covers in here as well. So it's kind of, we have our theme again. It's kids being kids. Only this is in black and white in London in the last century.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think about? I mean, when I first came across Mayne, I thought, wow, this is great. And then I started to come across all the other people doing very similar work. And I felt less kind of inclined towards his work. What do you think about that? Because, I mean, the great person really on all of this is Craig Atkinson with Cafe Raw Books, because he's been publishing work similar to this that followed on through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Incessantly. I mean, if you're not aware of Cafe Raw Books, you need to go and find out about Cafe Raw Books. If Absolutely. You like this podcast, you'll love that work. But what do you think, Fee?
I think that because it's a similar thing to Naomi and to Polly, in terms of the subjects that are being shot here are not like, well, they're not dramatic subjects. They're kids just being kids. And therefore, it's not like you look at these images. It's not like I look at these images of Roger Mayne's and think, oh, it's really important. It's really, it captures something very, very important and meaningful. And it's a great piece of art from the 20th century and so on. I think it's just a kind of like, he has a lovely eye. As you say, there are all these other people who had a lovely eye and were doing the same kind of thing. But I'm trying to avoid using the word pleasant, but it's lovely. It's lovely. It's nice stuff. It's interesting stuff. Whether it's desperately original, I don't know. Whether if you could only see one photographer who shot kids on the streets in the UK in post-war Britain, would it be Roger Mayne? I doubt that it would be him, certainly from what you're saying. But it's a nicely curated exhibition. And again, as I said at the beginning, sometimes you just want to see something. You want to see something that's not kind of like going to be too taxing in any way. You are in central London, you're going to Somerset House. You want to see something that'll take you half an hour or 45 minutes to see rather than 2 hours to see. And then you're going to go down to the terrace and have a drink. Which sounds a bit flippant, but I don't mean it like that. It's just that there is a place for all kinds of photography, and I think this is a really nice exhibition.
I before you said going off for a drink, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think it's kind of, it's good to, if you don't know about Roger Mayne, and that's Mayne, I should say. I should kind of sort of flag at this point so that you make sure that you know the correct spelling. It's a really nice cultural nostalgic trip, isn't it?
It is. It is. And it worked. He had a lovely eye. There's a really nice energy. There's just enough work in here that makes you wonder, this is a little bit threatening, a little bit scary, and then some stuff that's just, just fun. His love for his subjects, and also there's quite a bit of photography of his family, which, you can kind of go, okay, fine. These are lovely family portraits from the 1970s of somebody who was a very good photographer. I'm not 100% sure about that, but it's a very nice picture. Group, Rose Cottage Garden, 1970. And it basically it's sort of like a lovely bucolic, looks like it could be an ad for, or looks like it could be a sort of like an outtake from a Beatles album cover or something.
It really makes me, something I think about quite a bit, really, as far as photographers, when I'm speaking to photographers, is that idea that there are times when a photographer can hit upon a subject which then they become identified with. It's like a band. If you kick off being a new romantic band, that's going to be it for the rest of your life. And you either go with it or you try all these different things and alienate your initial audience, I should say, or you kind of just resent it. And I think there are some photographers. For me, Mayne is the photography of kids on the street in West London around Notting Hill. And they're great pictures.
They are. They're very nice pictures. And as I say, it's a very nicely curated exhibition. It hangs together well. It tells you if you don't know anything about Roger Mayne, and I certainly knew very little about Roger Mayne when I turned up, it's an exhibition that gives you a nice clear view of the photographer's life and his work and where he was coming from and what drove him. And it might not be to everybody's taste, but it's well done. His work is well done. The exhibition is well done. And
but it's also a bit of a fashion at the minute, I think. With Bert Hardy recently at the Photographers Gallery, we've got the big Lee Miller coming up at the Tate. For years, I was kind of decrying the fact that so much British photography was being ignored. And now suddenly you can't turn around for them. I think the only issue for me is that there is a tendency that we're seeing the same names that I remember seeing in the 1980s when I first discovered their work.
Possibly, but on the other hand, let's face it, you are very well informed about photography and the history of photography and contemporary photography, and not everyone else is. And I think
that put me in my place.
You know this stuff. Not everyone else does.
No, but it is that thing of rediscovery, isn't it? When the same names keep getting rediscovered.
Totally, absolutely, it's rediscovery. It's saying the same things again. What will be troublesome about this is if we get to a situation where people are being overlooked and the same names are being shown again and again. So I can't say at this point, I don't know if you can say, is there anybody who you think is being shamefully overlooked that we're not seeing exhibitions of at the moment?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of photographers who we're not seeing, actually. Yeah. But I think that there are a number of reasons for that. And I think invariably it's because their archives are in a mess, or their archives are lost, or, it's very expensive to put on an exhibition now. So if there's a body of work out there, which is already printed, maybe it's already framed, maybe it's ready to go, maybe the 2017 exhibition of Mayne could be, turfed out again, re-edited, and a few things added to it. It becomes an economic situation rather than trying to find bodies of work and printing them up and curating them. That's a much more expensive kind of process and difficult process to go through.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that I always felt about when I lived in Paris for a while and then came back to London was that Paris always felt to me like there were so many There's so much commitment to photography, and so many places you could always see photography in Paris. There's Jeu de Paume and the Bal and Maison Européenne de la Photographie and a whole bunch of other places. And London didn't seem to have the same commitment to photography exhibitions, simply in terms of venues. And there still aren't as many full-time photography venues in London as there are in other places.
Yeah, I think they're also really good, the French, at promoting people you don't know about. I think when I go to Paris Photo, I never I go to the big exhibitions, because you do, but I'm much more interested in those tiny ones that happen in a metro station or in some gallery in the middle of nowhere.
Absolutely. And there have been many exhibitions that I've seen in Paris, which I was like, wow, isn't that coming to London? Why don't they put it on over here? And it just doesn't come, it doesn't show up.
Yeah, and it doesn't get to America at all. I mean, that transatlantic kind of divide, I think, is very strong. There's a lot of stuff that happens there that doesn't come to Europe and vice versa.
But what I would like to think from these, taking the optimistic viewpoint, is if we're seeing more exhibitions like the ones I'm just highlighting today, which are not taking place in the obvious locations, and the Courtauld doing its first ever photography exhibition, hopefully this means that there are more venues that are realizing people like photography exhibitions. Maybe it's a good sign and means that there's more of an appetite for it. And maybe that is going to develop.
I don't know. I'd love to think so. I just know that when the National Portrait Gallery held the Avedon and then the Testino exhibitions, which were the two most successful exhibitions that had ever happened in their history of that gallery, the trustees were furious, because they felt it was dumbing down and it was mass market and therefore not what they should be doing. And if you look at it, ever since those two, and I cannot tell you how many people speak to me about that Avedon exhibition as being kind of game-changing for them. It was the early 90s, wasn't it? Early, mid-90s. But very few like that have happened since.
True, absolutely. But we do, it's like, as you're saying about... we're seeing the same photographers, and absolutely take your point about why we might be seeing the same photographers. But I do think also part of it is that people are looking for new audiences, or venues are trying to attract new audiences. And so the fact that these are new things happening in unusual places is a step forward, even if it means that the people who are coming to them could have seen this exhibition 7 years ago or whatever, but they weren't aware of photography exhibitions 7 years ago or whatever, or it wasn't on their radar back then. So I have to say, I think all of this is very heartening.
Yeah,
Positive.
I agree with you, but I just wish, as somebody who lives out in the countryside, I can tell you, I was looking for exhibitions, both photographic art, doesn't matter, to go with my daughter over the summer holidays. And one, I haven't been able to find anything that I feel we really want to go and see that isn't in London. And secondly, and it's an interesting point, really, just to perhaps, and also you said you had a date you wanted us to know about, but is the cost. I looked at Louise Bourgeois' exhibition to go to see, and for the family and I to go and see what is only 2 rooms of drawings is going to cost us £45.
I know. Well, this is why places like the Horniman Museum, free. The Imperial War Museum, free. The Family Museum, not free, but not expensive. And this is exactly what I was thinking. If I had my nieces and nephew coming over for the summer, I wouldn't want to be taking them and spending that much money on something that they're maybe interested in, maybe not interested in. That's why you need more off the beaten path exhibitions and museums, such as these ones that I'm just mentioning.
Yeah, I agree with you, but it's also, I think they need to do better in the way in which we're going completely off subject here, but kind of not. In that I think they need to do much better in showing what's included in the exhibition on the website. It's not good enough to have a couple of photographs and a bit of press bump there. If you're going to encourage people, that you've got to show them, what am I going to go and see? What am I, what's the environment? How much work am I going to see?
Absolutely. And I totally agree with that. And that's why some of us end up doing a lot of Instagram posts saying there's this and this and this and this. And every time I do, people say, oh, wow, yes, okay. Because I'm putting, 10 images on instead of 2 that are on the website, whatever. Although I am very behind with my Instagramming of exhibitions right now.
And there was a date that you wanted to mention.
You've already mentioned it, actually. I wanted to talk. It's like I haven't got I haven't got a magazine. You'll be relieved to hear this month. But once upon a time, year before last, I interviewed Albert Watson, and I asked Albert about if he had any advice for photography students, and he said, buy exhibition catalogs. He said this is a great way to learn about photography. This is interesting advice. And the exhibition catalog that's in my hand at the moment is called Lee Miller in Print. And this was an exhibition that took place in Rotterdam, November 23 to February 2020, February this year. It's a beautiful catalogue. It's got a load of essays. And as they point out, basically Lee Miller did spend her life and career in print as a model, as a photographer's assistant, as a photographer, and so on. So it has a load of essays about specific topics by people like her son, Anthony Penrose, by Robin Muir, of course, by Amy Boo Hassan, her biographer. And it's a great book. It's a really great book. And of course, the date is October next year when the big Lee Miller exhibition is opening in Tate Modern, which is...
I am slightly... I'm such a cynical person. I don't know. Perhaps life has dealt me this card, but with the new Hollywood blockbuster with Kate Winslet, yeah, exactly, playing her, and I've seen the trailer for that, and I have to say I was quite. It's a big Hollywood blockbuster. That's all I'm going to say. It seems to be a bit of a weepy and playing with the emotions and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, it's an amazing story. I'm currently reading Man Ray's autobiography. Are
you reading Self-Portrait by Man Ray?
Yes, I am.
Which I'm literally holding in my hand because that's the other thing that I'm reading. Isn't it?
The synchronicity of chance.
There you go. We literally are on the same page. I have been dipping in and out of Self-Portrait by Man Ray for a while now. And it's just, I find it fascinating, don't you? Because it's gossipy, but not too gossipy. And I personally find it very interesting when he talks about the way his photography is developing,
Yeah, no, I do completely. And actually, one of the things I think about it is what a shame we don't have more photographers writing their autobiography. I'm really sick to death of people telling me what photographs mean, what they think about the photographs and what they think about the photographer. And I'd like the photographer to tell me.
Well, absolutely. I couldn't agree more on that one. As you may remember, when I had my own digressing completely, but when I started my independent photography magazine, which is 2002, I made photographers write because I was like, listen, every journalist in the world has a take on what you do, but we want to know what your take is on what you do. And yeah, this Man Ray bio, this autobiography, is beautifully written, very interesting, and my God, he knew everybody.
Yeah, he sure did. And I get the feeling you are going to know everybody as you continue your journey through the galleries, magazines, and books.
I'll do my best. I'll try. Aiming for it.
And another fantastic collection of your adventures and journeys through the white walls and other coloured walls of the gallery world, the museum world, the photographic world. Thank you so much for doing this. And I look forward to catching up with you again in September as we look forward to the autumn and the fall.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Grant. Always such a pleasure to talk about this kind of stuff. And I always learn such a lot from talking to you about it as well. So yeah, terrific. Thanks very much.
That's great, and that's absolutely a pleasure. Of course, if you're listening and you're hearing what Fiona's saying, you're intrigued, go and find out about this stuff online. You don't actually have to go and see the physical exhibition, and let us know what you're seeing. You can get hold of Fiona. How can you get hold of you, Fee?
At The Art Dictator.
That's
on
it.
Instagram, on Threads, at The Art Dictator.
She is the art dictator. I'm not going to make any comment apart from saying thanks again, Fee, and catch up with you soon.
Brilliant. Thank you, Grant.
Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. And of course, over the coming week, take care.